We're creating a new way to access favorite queries, and we're just about finished. Over the last several episodes, we found and exposed favorite query data. We created a page to render favorite queries and tested and discovered a few gaps. Now, if you're joining us for the first time, then be sure to check the video description for links to other videos in this series. Now, in the prior episode, we made a to-do list. We said we need to add a query manager button to the upper right corner. We need to add a hover effect to each row, and then we need to open the query when someone clicks or taps a row. And I said the navbar has an interesting way of navigating. Rather than using a PeopleCode transfer or redirect, I mentioned there is a PeopleSoft JavaScript alternative. So let's do a little inspecting to find that trick. So here, let's go to the navigator and let's just inspect a link. And let's see how PeopleSoft is launching these. So we can see on the hyperlink there, it says JavaScript PTNavBar.OpenInWindow. Here, let's find another one. Inspect again, and PTNavBar.OpenInWindow. So we should do the same thing. Our Go to Query Manager button should leverage the same JavaScript routine. Now the question is, how? How will we cause a PeopleSoft button to behave in this manner? You see, a PeopleSoft button invokes PeopleCode on the app server, but we need a way to invoke JavaScript on the client. So again, how will we get PeopleSoft button to behave in this manner? Well, the answer is we won't. Instead, we'll use an HTML template with an HTML area. We'll generate the query manager URL at runtime and pass it to an HTML template. So that is going to require an HTML area on our page and a corresponding HTML area field on a derived work record. Next, we need each row to be clickable. When someone clicks or taps a row, PeopleSoft should open the target query, and we'll want to leverage this same JavaScript launch approach as the Oracle delivered navbar links. So let's do this. Let's inspect the HTML that PeopleSoft is generating for our My Favorite Queries grid. And let's see if there's some way that we can hook into the row processing. Now, in a prior episode, we added a group box to this grid to stack all of the columns in vertically. And we can look here through the HTML and we can see there's the row. And then inside there, we see this here. Oh, there it is. There's our group box. See, it says PS Box Group, and there are the two style classes that we added to our group box, PSC list-call1 and the display inline block. Keep an eye on that display inline block. I think I have an idea for you later. Now, if we attach this group box to a derived work field, then we can use the JavaScript events property to add a JavaScript onclick attribute. So that will be the second field on our derived work record. Now, the click handler JavaScript will have to be dynamically generated because each row launches a different query. And using a derived work field will let us dynamically modify each row's attributes. Now, finally, we need a way to implement a hover effect. Now, there are many ways to do this, but the easiest way is with a hidden hyperlink that has the execute PC on row group click checkbox selected. So that will be the third field on our derived work record. Okay, so back to Application Designer. Let's create a new derived work record. And let's insert some fields. How about HTML area? And let's add the field called group box. And one more field, BTN open query. Fantastic. Now, these are all Oracle delivered fields. And a common question is, should you use Oracle delivered fields in a custom solution? I mean, it's a great question because there is risk in using Oracle delivered fields. So Oracle owns these fields, so they may choose to modify or even at worst, delete them. That would have an impact on our solution. So here's how I decide. If I'm creating a table to store data related to Oracle's data, then I'm definitely going to use the Oracle delivered fields. The point of making fields standalone definitions is to share meaning and relationships across tables. On the other hand, if I'm creating a solution that is not related to Oracle's delivered records, then reuse is a matter of risk tolerance. For example, we're using the HTML area field here. Could Oracle delete or change this field? Yes. Will they? Probably not. For this field, I consider the risk extremely low. Okay, let's change our record type to derived work, and then let's save it as, how about YT fav QRY WRK. Okay, back on our page, let's add an HTML area for the button. Now, the location of the HTML area is not important. It must be contained inside this group box, but where within that group box is not important. In Fluid, containment matters, but location does not, because the Fluid rendering engine controls layout. In a prior episode, we added style classes to this group box to tell the browser how to lay out content within this group box. And for review, the style class tells the browser to align content to the right. So I'm going to put the group box on the upper right because that's where I would expect to find it. One of our Fluid best practices is to make content at design time match content at runtime. Think of it this way. As a developer, if someone shows you a page with a problem, specifically pointing to a button in the upper right corner, when you open that page at design time, where will you look for the button? Of course, in the upper right corner. Since Fluid controls layout, we can technically put this HTML area anywhere within this group box. But to make it easier to maintain, we'll put it where we expect to find it. Okay, let's associate the HTML area to our derived work field. So the record YT fave QRY work and HTML area. And let's attach the existing row stacking group box, this one right here, to the corresponding derived work field. And that field is group box, appropriately labeled. And let's add a hyperlink for the hover effect. So that would be the hyperlink field. And we'll put it at the end, make a little bit more room. Perfect. We'll mark it as a hyperlink. We'll associate it with the derived work area and the btn open query. We'll set the label to text and standard text. We'll go to the use tab and we'll select execute PC on row group click. And we're also going to select the option enable when page is display only. Now we're going to hide this link using PeopleCode. We're going to hide the whole column. So let's go to the general tab and set a name for this field. How about launch query btn? Okay, fantastic. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there's several ways to implement a hover effect. This is just one way. Okay, our page changes are all set. So right now they're just structural. In fact, they're even invisible. We need code to make them work. So let's do this. Let's close the page so we don't have any conflicts with our component. And next step would be to add some people code. So let's go to the component and let's find the component post build event. That's where we're going to generate the URL for the query manager. And then we'll also use that to set the HTML for the query manager button. So view people code, and we'll use component post build. Now I happen to have a people code snippet on the side, so I'm going to copy that and I'll share that with you. We see the first thing it does is generate the URL to launch query manager. Then we're using that PTNavBar.OpenInWindow to launch that URL. And then we're going to pass that href, the JavaScript fragment that we're creating, we're going to pass that off to an HTML template. So let's do this because this HTML template does not exist yet. So I'm going to create a new HTML definition, and I have that as well on the side. And I'll paste that HTML. You can see that the HTML here is very simple. In fact, this is the HTML that PeopleSoft would have generated, or similar to the HTML that PeopleSoft would have generated if we used a standard PeopleSoft button. You'll notice that we're using all of the Oracle delivered style classes. There are no custom style classes here. Now, the reason for that is so that we inherit as much CSS as possible. Oracle's changed the color of their buttons over time, so I don't want to be responsible for maintaining that CSS. Instead, I want to leverage as much CSS as possible. Okay, and let's save this HTML definition. Now, we actually have the name of it here, so just to make sure we don't have any typos, let's copy paste. Perfect. Okay, the last thing that our post-build people code does is hide the hyperlink field. You can see here, we're getting a pointer to the grid and then hiding that launch query button, marking it as invisible. That's kind of interesting, isn't it? We don't want the hyperlink visible. We're only using it to leverage the hover effect. The execute PC on row group click causes the entire row to be clickable, even though the hyperlink is hidden. And by the way, the hover effect is a nice visual cue on a desktop, but it's irrelevant today on the mobile, or you might say for the non-sighted user. So we just have one step left. Each row requires JavaScript to launch the correct query. So let's use the row init. Let's save this. Let's go back to our component and let's find the row init of the data record, row init, and we'll apply some people code here as well. Now, the purpose of this people code is to set the target URL when somebody clicks on one of those queries. Now, to launch a query, we must know the query name and the query owner. So the first line determines, is this a public query, basically the query owner. Now, the second line generates that URL to launch the query from the query name that we selected from My Favorite Queries. And the final line uses that JavaScript events property to set a click handler. And as you can see here, we're going to use a short template to identify the attributes for the JavaScript events. So let me grab that template and let's create the HTML definition. And we'll save it using the name from our code so we don't have any typos. Okay, fantastic. So you can see here that, again, the click handler with PTNavBar.OpenInWindow. Now, interesting, on our button, we used a hyperlink with an href attribute, but this time we're using a click handler because this is associated with a group box. Group boxes don't have an href attribute, a hyperlink does. But most HTML elements have a click handler. That's what we're leveraging here. We'll just ask the PeopleCode to pass in the target URL so we can leverage that Peoplesoft OpenInWindow JavaScript function. Now, the JavaScript events property is very interesting. The way we're using it makes sense here. We're adding JavaScript to respond to the click event, the JavaScript events property. But we can use this property to insert any attribute we desire. For example, I use it with home pages to insert content reference IDs, cref IDs, into tile HTML. With this property, you can create and update any HTML attribute you desire. That's pretty cool. Hey, I think we're ready to test it out. So let's save. Let's go back online and reload and try out our favorite queries. Oh, that's amazing. Notice the Open in Query Manager button. Let's test it. And sure enough, there's the query manager. So let's try one of these favorite queries as well. So ptsec plist, roles assigned to a permission list. Fantastic. Let's find out what roles are assigned to a permission list. Look at that. It launches the query just like we requested. So how about pt 1000? How many roles use pt? Oh, interesting. Several different roles have pt 1000. So let's do a little bit more testing of our list. And we can see that the entire row looks clickable as it should. But let's see what happens when we click on the outside here. Oh, nothing. Interesting. So what's happening is it's invoking the field change people code or the field change event for the execute PC on row group click hidden hyperlink. But we're not actually seeing the click handler unless we're specifically over the words. Well, why is that? That's because of a style class that we included in a prior episode. So if we look here, we see PSC display inline block. So what that's causing is the words or the group box to be the size of the words inside the group box. So it's a nice box, but it stops right here, or the shorter one here stops there, whereas the longer one goes farther out. We want them to span the entire width. So let's do this. Let's eliminate that PC display inline block attribute, CSS style class, from our group box. Well, if we knew we were going to eliminate it, why do we put it there in the first place? I wanted to demonstrate another style class, give you an opportunity to experience more of the PeopleSoft CSS and perhaps see some of the things that could go wrong, how we might inappropriately use an Oracle delivered style class. Okay, great. I'm going to go all the way to the outside here and let's see. Yes, fantastic. It loaded a different query. So I was thinking of different ways that we could enhance the My Favorite Queries tile. For example, I like icons and images. So at one point, I actually put an image next to each item to represent a query. But every query had the same image. And if they all have the same image, it just seemed like it was extra noise. It wasn't helpful. Now, I still want images, but those images must be meaningful. They must have a purpose. Perhaps we could use an icon to represent public versus private queries, or a different icon for each query type, whether it's say a user query, a role query, or a process query, and so on. Now, another way I might enhance this is with accessibility. So let's see, let's drill in here really quickly and let's take a look. Because one of the things that you'll notice is the way that we implemented our hover effect, we can see that PeopleSoft is turning the entire row, marking the entire row as clickable, and it's using role equals button, but it isn't clicking on the row that causes it to navigate. It's clicking on the group box. So we may have a conflict here with accessibility, something that we may want to fix or enhance later. But anyway, let us know your thoughts. What changes will you make when you implement your My Favorite Queries tile? Share your ideas in the video comments. Now, at JSM Pros, we teach people tools and web development concepts like this every week. Be sure to check out our website to see what we're offering next. Or here's an idea: subscribe to our LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter feeds to receive updates every time we post a course. Or do you have a team that wants to learn more? Give us a call and let's get something scheduled. Now, before we go, I have a question for you. Do you have a topic you'd like us to cover in a future soundbite? If so, let us know by sharing your idea at soundbites.jsmpros.com. Now, if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe for more content. And we look forward to seeing you in the next episode.